When I first played the demo for Neo The World Ends With You, just days before the full game released, I was honestly floored. I typically despise JRPGs for their tedious gameplay and convoluted stories, but Neo's fluid combat and likable cast of characters, amongst other strong aspects, led me to believe it would genuinely be a masterpiece. So despite not knowing much of its predecessor, I went ahead and bought it. Now, having played the game in its entirety, while many of my praises do hold up, I can't say I'm fully satisfied. However, I did enjoy its story to a degree. The original setup is that two teenagers find themselves in an underworld alternate dimension to the city of Shibuya, where they must compete against opposing teams in an event called the Reaper's Game for a chance to return to the real world. It's a generic premise with some lame plot devices that don't help it to stand out among Square Enix's backlog. Time travel, alternate realities, dream sequences, it's all here. What sets Neo apart from the masses though is how it conveys its story. Instead of trying to make sense of every mission objective in the context of its overarching narrative, you complete missions to achieve a higher rank in the Reaper's Game. It's a bit of a cop-out, but the straightforwardness leaves room for a lot of potential. That potential comes in the form of characters. It's surprising just how realistic they are. Rindo is a very balanced protagonist. He's somewhat apathetic, but still caring. His friend Fret is far more flamboyant and up for any challenge thrown his way. Nagi, the third member of their group, is antisocial yet intelligent. I especially appreciate how her nerdy characterization disguises the abundance of exposition she provides. Not every character has a super compelling personality. Some are quite bland and based on lazy gimmicks. However, at the very least, each character is consistent with their dialogue, and almost everyone is excellently voice acted. My biggest gripe with Neo's story is that it fails to bring everything to a satisfying conclusion. The game will spend hours upon hours reiterating the same traits in its core cast of characters, but when it comes time for those character arcs to develop, there's very little build-up, just an immediate shift in personality. Far worse is that in the end, characters that were once seemingly important will disappear, while the ones that seemed inconsequential will become the centerpiece of the narrative. Worst of all, though, is that Neo attempts to tie up the plot threads of its predecessor by bringing back its characters. This would be acceptable if this game were a direct sequel, but it isn't. In the end, it feels like Neo's main characters are sidestepped to adhere to fans of the original. Between the abrupt conclusions to character arcs, apparent importance of characters that should have been forgotten about, and abundance of closure, there is a distinct lack of tension building up to the key events that occur at the end of the story. No plot threads are left hanging this time, instead it feels like they were knotted too quickly and too rapidly. While the story will often feel immediate, like many RPGs, Neo is heavily padded. Like I mentioned, the mission objectives here in the beginning are straightforward, and separated from the bigger picture. Whenever the game does try to concretize these objectives and make sense of them in a grander context though, not only does it waste time, but the dialogue takes a dip in quality. These sorts of issues also can be seen in the world. The city of Shibuya is divided into areas that you'll unlock over the course of that first half of the game, which helps to make the world feel more interesting. However, in order to get to new districts, or even back to ones you've already visited, you'll often need to complete some random objectives, like buying new clothing or defeating a certain number of enemies. This makes the map feel awkwardly segmented. Luckily, on the surface level, the city of Shibuya is a wonder. It's brought to life by a gorgeously cel-shaded art style inspired by Jet Set Radio. Although it may not also be where it gets its music inspiration from, like Jet Set Radio, the soundtrack is a culmination of different genres that still all convey similar attitudes, and they help to even further diversify the distinct districts of Shibuya. The city also feels more alive due to your methods of interacting with it. Even if the shops and diners need to be present, as they allow you to engage with a few of the game's systems, the fact that shopkeepers become friendlier the more you buy from them adds a layer of depth to the world. The game also features a few missions that involve some interesting mechanics, like solving a puzzle to help remind someone of something, and diving into a person's mind to fix a problem, like a psychonaut. This helps to add a layer of depth to the NPCs, even if most of them are entirely superfluous. Some of them also have thought bubbles that you can read. They're never helpful, but it's a nice touch. The real redeeming quality of this game though is the combat, which will take some time to get used to. Even in the demo, where I had almost no complaints, I found it to be very mashy, yet still satisfying. However, as you sink your teeth into it, you'll realize there is a level of strategy. First of all, each enemy has a unique and interesting attribute. There are sharks that will splash out of the water and bite you, birds will swoop in and pick up members of your party, jellyfish multiply into large groups to do the most damage. The list goes on and on. Far more interesting though is how you engage with these enemies, through a mechanic based around pins. Each character can be equipped with a pin that will give them a certain attack, assigned to one button on your controller. You can mix and match so that one character is laying down bombs, one is stirring up lightning, one is throwing shurikens. Using specific pins is fun, even if eventually they do get old. I stuck with certain builds for a while, but whenever I got bored or was having trouble with a specific encounter, I changed up my style and it helped me enjoy the game more. One of my biggest praises in general is that Nioh isn't grindy. There is an XP system, but since the combat is so skill based, it doesn't prohibit you too much. There's also the fact that numerous other systems are put in place to make sure you don't have to grind, like the ability to buy clothing with stat effects and obtain new pins. Even if this game were grindy though, I wouldn't mind too much considering how fun the combat is. Nioh still has me extremely conflicted. I thoroughly enjoyed its art direction, music, and combat, but that's all I can say in terms of definitive praises. It's highly uneven in almost every other regard. However, even if there are some pacing issues and its wildly inconsistent story doesn't manage to stick a landing, there were enough positives in my experience for me to safely say I liked this game.